In this video, I'm going to introduce you to another type of FRQ. This time it will be the concept application question. Just a quick reminder, the AP government exam consists of two parts. First, the multiple choice, which is worth 50% of your overall score. And then the four FRQs follow, and they combined are also worth 50% of your score. So remember, each of the four types of FRQs is worth 12.5% of your overall exam score. So the concept application type, which is listed as number 1 on this slide, is about 1/8 of your exam score. And like most of the FRQs, it's expected that you're going to spend about 20 of the 100 total minutes on this type of FRQ. I'll remind you as you look at this slide that there's a separate video on general writing tips, and you'll want to look at that again and often throughout the year. These are bits of advice that apply to writing any of the FRQs, including the concept application type. Let's look at this type in particular. Concept application is probably the FRQ that comes closest to being what I would call just a straightforward FRQ. And by that I mean it's designed to see if you just understand how government works. Therefore, for that reason, just about any topic that we study throughout the year could be used in this type of FRQ. There are other topics that seem to lend themselves to the other types of FRQs. But concept application is broad enough that really any government concepts you learn can show up here. And sometimes multiple ones could appear in one prompt. So more specifically, the College Board tells us that in this type of FRQ, you're going to be given an authentic or a hypothetical scenario. So normally this takes the form of like a newspaper article, or maybe even a primary document. It's going to be text that is going to introduce you to something that either has happened in government or potentially could happen in government. It's a scenario, it's an issue. If you think about it, the phrase concept application, what they want to see here is, can you take what you have learned about government and apply it to real life, or if necessary, a made-up scenario about government? Can you apply what you're learning to the real life, day-to-day happenings in our government and in our politics? So it's very much about applying what you know. The CAQ is scored out of 4 points. The SCOTUS comparison and the quantitative analysis FRQs, those are scored out of 3 points. And the argument essay FRQ is scored out of 6 points. But remember, regardless of how many points it's scored out of, they're all weighted the same. The only reason I point this out is because here you have, I guess you could say, one more opportunity, one more point to score well. If it's scored out of 3 points and you miss a point, 2 out of 3 is a little bit worse than getting 3 out of 4. From all the FRQs of this type that I've seen, usually Part A is worth 1 point, as is Part C. Part B is where there's that second point. And so Part B is typically the portion of this response where you'll write the most. That second point is usually earned because you have to explain something. And remember, this is mentioned in the other video. When you're explaining, you want to be very thorough. You want to usually write in short, simple sentences and really spell something out so that anyone can understand it. So we'll take a little extra time on Part B in this one. Here's how I suggest you approach this type of FRQ, and I'll be showing you an example here in just a minute. But like I said, you will see a passage that will lay out this scenario. That'll come first. And then below the passage will be the questions, A, B, and C. My advice is that you read the questions first, not the scenario. Get an idea from the questions of what this FRQ is about, what topics it's going to introduce you to, and also what you're looking for as you read the scenario. That way, when you do read the scenario, you're reading it kind of knowing where this is going. The second bullet here tells you, of course, now read the scenario. And if you're doing this, on paper, certainly underline, highlight, circle, make notations as you read the scenario. But I also encourage you, when you're reading the scenario, this is very important, ask yourself, what is the specific scenario or issue in this passage? Now, when I show you the example, you'll see what I mean. But sometimes the passage is filled with extra information, things that aren't exactly the main point. You really want to read it to find that main point. What is the scenario? What is the issue that I'm to be focused on? And I would write it down. Not write it down in your response necessarily, but write it down on the paper. Make notes. This is the specific scenario in this passage so that you can keep focus on it and you can keep coming back to it. And then finally, I tell you to note well, a lot of times the questions in this type of FRQ use the phrase in the context of the scenario. And what they mean by that is you need to be relating your knowledge of government to this specific scenario, this issue that they gave you. So in other words, you don't want to just talk about government concepts generically or vaguely. You don't want to just say, hey, look, I understand how this works. You want to connect what you know to the scenario. Okay, that's the heart of this FRQ. It is concepts applied to a scenario. And if you fail to do that, you don't earn the points. So keep that in mind. When you see that in the context of the scenario, that's your reminder. You must be relating it. All right, let me switch you now to a sample FRQ of this type. So you will see here that this paragraph is the scenario. And it comes from Online Time magazine from 2016. And so far, what I've noticed of these FRQs is that they are often rather current, relatively recent. As I suggested, you would want to read the questions first. So part A asks you to identify and describe the feature of the Electoral College system that causes the issue outlined in the scenario. So right there, I would say, look, you've got to figure out what is the issue in this scenario. Then you need to identify a feature of the Electoral College system that causes this issue, and you have to describe it. Now, you might say that's a lot to do for one point, but you don't necessarily need to talk a lot about the issue. You need to be aware of it to answer this question. But once you are aware of that issue, you need to identify a feature of the Electoral College system and be able to describe that feature. That's where you're going to earn the point. Then in part B, you're going to explain how the Electoral College system could be changed to fix the issue outlined in the scenario. So again, we've got to know what that issue is that needs fixing. And then we've got to explain how the Electoral College system could be changed to fix it. Now, here's where you're getting 2 points. You're getting 2 points. The first one for coming up with a logical change. Now, I say logical, and you'll see why. You can't just come up with anything. It's got to be a realistic, and there's probably only a couple, 3 different ideas here. But you need to come up with a way that the Electoral College could be changed. And by identifying and describing that change, you'll earn 1 point. Then the second point will come from explaining how that change would remedy the issue. So you need to come back to the issue once again. And then usually in part C, they take you in a different direction. It says, in the context of the scenario, Explain how the Electoral College system can affect individual political behavior. So part C is not necessarily related to the scenario, but you want to say, okay, because of what is happening in this passage, because of this so-called problem or issue that needs to be fixed, individual political behavior can be affected, and I'll tell you how. So you want to really think about those words, individual political behavior. So it must be a behavior, something someone does. A political behavior, so of a political type, and it must be done by individuals, okay? That's what that phrase means. The most common answer to that is something to do with voting, but it could also be protesting, rallies, contacting congressmen, making campaign contributions, joining interest groups, running for office. Those are all political behaviors that individuals might engage in. The question is saying, in light of this issue or problem, how does the Electoral College system affect those behaviors? You need to explain that to earn this point. So now let's look at the passage. It says, data from the 2016 presidential campaign indicate that 53% of campaign events for the two major parties, presidential and vice presidential candidates, in the 2 months before the November election were in only 4 states. So right there, we would pause and say, okay, they're telling me that in this presidential campaign, the candidates spent most of their time, 53% of their events, more than half, were in simply 4 states. Already you should be starting to think, oh, okay, I get it. These are swing states. I gotcha. These are the states that were important in that election. They were close. They spent a lot of time there because they wanted to win those. Those would be the ones that might decide the election. Continuing, during that same time, 87% of campaign visits by the 4 candidates were in 12 battleground states, and none of the 4 candidates ever went to 27 states. Okay, so again, reinforcing this idea. They're spending most of their time in certain states, battleground states or swing states, and not in others. Even in the swing states where they do campaign, the candidates focus on urban areas where most voters live. In Pennsylvania, for example, 72% of Pennsylvania campaign visits by the 2 major candidates in the final 2 months were to Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. So now what we're seeing is that, okay, candidates spend a lot of time campaigning in select states that are swing states. And when there, they really focus on the major urban areas. They don't really spread themselves out throughout the state. So the issue here is that candidates are campaigning in very limited areas. They tend to be in urban areas or select areas of certain states. Now, Part A asks, what feature of the Electoral College system causes this to happen? And there really is only one right answer to this. This is, and I hope you see it, this is the winner-take-all feature. Because states are winner-take-all, that creates key swing states, that causes them to campaign where they can get the most votes in those states. So you would earn the point for Part A by identifying that, using that term, winner-take-all, and describing it. In Part B, we have to propose a logical change to the system to fix this. And then in Part C, we'd have to talk about how the winner-take-all feature in the Electoral College system in general affects individual political behavior. So I will share with you some possible responses. And if you would like to pause the video to read these more carefully, you can. Now scroll down. I've given you 2 possible ways to answer Part B. I'll scroll down so you can see an answer to Part C. I hope this video was helpful, and that you'll do well on the concept application question.